Now today they tell us that the Jewish people are God's chosen people from Scripture. They call them Hebrews. But if you look at the Jewish people, you see that there are many different kinds of Jewish people. So if they are all Hebrews, how come that they look so different? So to understand where we are now in America and Europe today concerning Jewish people, we have to go first back all the way to the beginning, and I'm going to go through history until today to give us a better understanding about these people. And you'll see that they have always been part of our nations. Wherever we went, they went. From ancient Judea to modern day America. So let's go back all the way to ancient times to show you that indeed most Jewish people have a Hebrew forefather. So let's go all the way back to Abraham. And no, Abraham was not a Jew, at least if you think that Jew comes from Judahite. Because the Judahites were a people of one tribe. These tribes came from Jacob. The Judahites are called after the grandson of Abraham. So Abraham cannot be called after his own grandson. They were not even there yet. But indeed, Abraham was a Hebrew. And God promised Abraham that from his seed, from his chosen children, would come a nation and a company of nations. So from Abraham would not just come one nation called Israel. It will be a company of nations under God. And these nations would be established through Christ. Abraham, according to Jesus, was even looking forward to the day of Christ. But even though Abraham did not know how all this would come to pass, he still had faith in God. He left his home and be led by God, so God can work through him and his seed to accomplish this. So God promised Abraham that seed, that next generation through whom the promises would continue. Because through Abraham and his seed, the promise, the covenants, the dominion, the birthright will be established. But Abraham got impatient. Because he was older, his wife Sarah was barren, so he went to his concubine, which was an Egyptian woman. Most people look at the Middle East, at the demographics, how it looks now. They assume that the Middle East was always brown like it is today. But of course that is not true. The nations in the Middle East were established through the sons of Noah. And of course all these sons were the same. Noah was perfect in his genealogy. That means that Noah did not have 3 different races as sons. And we know that Assyria was built by sons of Noah. The Chaldeans, the Babylonians, the Canaanites, they all came from the sons of Noah. And even Mizraim, who founded Egypt, was still a descendant of Noah, even though later they became amalgamated. So Noah was still Caucasian, and we can find ancient artifacts where we indeed see that they were Caucasian. Not looking at later depictions, the earliest depictions. So of course Abraham was made a promise that from his bloodline, from his family, from his seed would come the next generation of promise. Therefore, Abraham did not go to a sub-Saharan African woman or a brown Arab woman. That doesn't make any sense, right? He took an Egyptian woman who was still Caucasian, and that son was called Ishmael. But God promised Abraham to get that promised son from Sarah. So Ishmael was not the son of promise. But still he was Abraham's son. And even though he sent Ishmael and Hagar away, Right? God heard his prayer, and Ishmael, being Abraham's son, would be blessed. He would be a father of his own people. Let's read it. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But read on. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee in this set time in the next year. So God said, send him away. This is not the son of promise. Next year, even though your wife is barren, next year she will bear that son of promise, through whom I will establish covenants. And that was Isaac. And on this map we can see where Ishmael went. He established his own nation there in the northwestern tip of Saudi Arabia. And Abraham had more sons, for example the Midianites, and they also lived in northern Arabia. But both of them were not of the promised seed. The promised seed was Isaac. But of course the Ishmaelites and the Midianites were still Caucasian people back then. So the promise to Abraham was established through his son Isaac. But since God is the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, let's take a look at Jacob now. Isaac had a wife called Rebekah, and the prophecy was that from her womb would come 2 nations or 2 different peoples. But of course that does not mean that her twin sons were 2 different races. They were twin brothers, Esau and Jacob. So why was God so strict to Abraham and his seed not to intermarry with the surrounding nations? Well, God even had to put it in writing. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy. God wanted to prevent them from the error that, for example, Esau made. Let's read it. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughters shalt not give unto his sons, nor his daughters shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy sons from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. So don't marry these Canaanites, these Hivites, these Hittites, because they will cause your children to follow other gods. So if we go back to the story of Jacob and Esau, we see that this is exactly what Esau did. Esau took his wives from the women of Canaan. Ada, daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and Aholibamah, daughter of Anah, and granddaughter of Zibeon, the Hivite. So we see that Esau did not care about God's promise. He went out and married Canaanite women who caused him to serve other gods. So Esau was cut off from the birthright and the dominion mandate. And he went away also to the area in North Arabia. That land would later be called Edom. And if you zoom in, you see that it is right next to where the Ishmaelites lived. So what did Esau do when he came there with his Canaanite women? Yes, he also started to intermarry with Ishmaelites. When Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take him a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and was gone to Padamaram. And Esau, seeing that the daughters of Canaan pleased not Isaac his father, then went Esau unto Ishmael, and took unto the wives which he had with Mahalath, the daughters of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sisters of Nebajoth, to be his wife. So now Esau intermarried with Canaanite women, and also with the daughter of Ishmael. So these Edomites and Ishmaelites, they are very closely related and even already intermarried to one another. So at this point it was not about race mixing, even though that also started to happen later. It was predominantly now that the other sons of Abraham and the other nations around them were worshipping other gods, horrible gods. So don't intermarry them, because these women will cause you to serve their gods. So when Esau went south and he met Ishmael, right, the Ishmaelites also adopted Canaanite gods. That's why the story is that Muhammad took away all these different idols from the Kaaba. These were all Canaanite gods. So Jacob was the promised seed, the son of the covenant, not Ishmael. Ishmael and Esau were cut off from the birthright. It was now about Jacob, and Jacob was renamed Israel. And we know that the Hebrews, who would become the Israelites, were in Egypt until Moses took them out of Egypt. Now they wandered through the wilderness for 40 years. Many Christians think that they were in that little piece of desert walking circles for 40 years. But if you read the book of Jasher, you can see that even though the Amalekites, Edomites kept them from entering their promised land back then, they wandered through the other nations, even warring with them. But God promised them that land that was occupied by the Canaanites. And when the Israelites went in, they established the nation of Israel according to all 12 tribes. All 12 tribes had their own little area within that land. But they came into an argument with each other, and now the kingdom of Israel was divided. Now we had the northern house of Israel and the southern house of Judah. The southern house of Judah was called after the patriarch Judah. They were majority Judahites, Benjamites also, and Levites who took care of the priesthood. But the Israelites started to worship other gods and idols again. So God caused the Assyrians to take them away. They were deported and they never returned. There was only a small remnant left in Jerusalem, but also they would face judgment. This small group was taken into Babylon. Now that all the Israelites were deported, that whole country did not stay empty. Because in 2 Kings we read, And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cuthah, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria, instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria, and dwelt in the cities thereof. But also south of Israel, where the Edomites and the Ishmaelites lived, they were no friends of Israel. They hated them. They still held a grudge against the children of Jacob, because God gave them the birthright. And Esau and Ishmael have been confederate against Ishmael ever since, even until today. Keep not thy silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, of Moab, and the Hagarites, Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre. The Edomites even helped the Babylonians. They loved the fact that Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. Listen what they say. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundations thereof. So after the true Israelites were taken into Babylon, the Edomites, south of Judah, they moved in a large part of the old kingdom of Judah. It was called Idumea, where Edomites started living. And when God used the Persians, led by King Cyrus, which were also still a Greek white-looking people back then, the Israelites from Babylon moved back to Jerusalem. But by that time, whole of that land was occupied by Edomites, Babylonians, all kinds of different people. The Israelites were only a small people in that big land. The rest of the Israelites were still gone, and they would be known as the lost tribes of the house of Israel. And the Israelites in the 3rd century before Christ, they decided to try and unify all these different people by converting them into their Hebrew religion. They wanted the Edomites to get circumcised and also keep the Hebrew laws. But these Edomites and these Babylonians, they were very powerful. The merchants of Babylon. And it didn't take long before they started to infiltrate into the Pharisaical school. They infiltrated in high positions, and we even got a king, Herod, who was at least half Edomite. And he installed his own people in high positions. That's why many of the Pharisees and scribes were actually Edomites and not Israelites. So these Edomites and Babylonians started to implement the Babylonian philosophy and the tradition of their elders into the Hebrew religion. And that is still carried until today and written in books called the Babylonian Talmud. But even though the true Israelites were divorced, they were taken away, they became lost, they broke the covenant, the prophecy was that God will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. These two houses would be united again. This unification would be through Christ. And this is how the two sticks of Ezekiel would become one stick again. So by the time Jesus came on the scene, right, there were many of there who were not of his sheep. He said, my sheep hear my voice, they follow me, but you cannot hear my words because you are not of my sheep. He was telling all the non-Israelite people there, like Babylonians and Edomites, that they didn't want to follow him because they were never of him to begin with. So when the Romans conquered the whole biblical world, the Roman Empire, they called the kingdom of Judah Judea. And all these different peoples living in Judea were called Judeans. But being a Judean did not mean that you were of the real house of Israel. The same thing we have now in America. You can be from any part of the world. If you live in America, you are called an American. But that does not identify who you truly are as a people. But Jesus came for the house of Israel. Jesus himself was of the house of Judah. And he came only for them. And then in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. This whole Babylonian Edomite power fell. And the true Israelites were united with the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which were in Europe. So not all these people who called themselves of Israel were actually of Israel. Many called themselves Jews or Judeans, but were not of the synagogue of Satan. Yes, they called themselves Judeans or later Jews, but only because they lived in that area. They were not Israelites. So what happened to these people? Where did they go after Israel, that land, was destroyed? These Edomite, Babylonian Judeans, they went all through the Roman Empire. They moved into the Arabian Peninsula, make cities like Medina, even further south, because the northern part of Ethiopia was still part of the Roman Empire, even into North Africa. Right? And they intermixed also with the local populations. And especially after the Arabs, who were still white, the Ishmaelites, they started to convert to Islam in the 7th century and convert also the dark races from Africa into Islam. Started to use black Africans as slaves and soldiers, and eventually also started to intermix with them. Also, they started to intermix with the darker races in the southern region of Ethiopia. That's why modern-day Ethiopians claim that they are Jewish, and they are right for the large part, but they also have sub-Saharan African DNA. Just like Jews went even so far as India. We find Indian Jews, North African Jews, and also many Jews, especially the rich ones, the merchants, went into the richest part of the Roman Empire. After Islam was established, we see even that the Khazar Empire in modern-day Ukraine, they converted to Judaism. So now you had a whole new gene pool of people who intermixed with the Edomites, and they became known as the Ashkenazi Jews. That's why there is a large variety of Jews, but they all have a common ancestor. That's Esau. And the Edomite Jewish merchants, the Sephardic Jews in Spain, they became very rich. But besides that they became rich, they also kept their Babylonian, Edomite, Canaanite religion intact. Till Queen Isabella said, "It's enough, I don't want this no more." So Queen Isabella of Spain, she said, either you leave Spain, you convert to Catholicism, you can stay, or you face persecution. Now in that time the Netherlands became a world empire. They had their East Indian trading companies. They were the first multinational company, and Holland was thriving. But besides that, Holland was also one of the first who had a liberal stance towards other religions. So Jews were tolerated. They could go to Holland and practice Judaism. And that's why the Sephardic Jews went to Amsterdam. It was freedom for them. If you look at the picture on the left, this is a statue made by Michelangelo depicting a Jew. And you can see that he looks very white. So why does he have two horns? Was he depicted as a devil? Well, no matter how you interpreted it, it can also mean that it is describing the one who looks like a lamb but has two horns, speaking like the dragon. Anyway, in Holland we had a painter called Rembrandt, and he had some affinity with the Jews. So he started to make pictures. But you can see that also Rembrandt depicted Jews in different ways. Sometimes they looked very white, sometimes they look a bit Turkic, because by that time there was already so many different kinds of Jews flocking into Holland. When the Jews were in Spain, they were majority still white, even though Jews always intermarried wherever they went. But even the Ishmaelites who became Muslim, they were still predominantly white men. Even Muhammad is described as a white man with a red beard. Also the North African Berbers were still white, and they invaded Spain. In fact, it was the Sephardic Jews with all their power who opened the doors for Islam to come in, because Ishmael and Edom have always been confederate against Jacob. But the Islamists, they also went into the sub-Saharan African regions, using them as slaves, as soldiers, and also started to intermix with them. That's why many Spanish people also became darker, because the original Spanish people were just as Germanic as North Europe. So a Jew is not of one race. Modern day Jews are a mixture of different kinds of people. But no matter what mixture they have, they might be the original ancient people in Judea, but they were never of the house of Israel, because they simply are not from Jacob.